Manager kicked a homeless woman. Unaware she was the CEO's wife undercover, what the CEO did next. The kick landed with a dull, sickening thud that echoed across the marble lobby, loud enough to cut through the low hum of conversations and the clicking heels of executives passing by. The homeless woman stumbled backward, her frail body crashing into a polished column, her bag flying from her hands as gasps rippled through the crowd. For a split second, everything froze: the security desk, the waiting clients, even the cameras mounted on the walls, before chaos surged forward like a wave that couldn't be stopped. "Get out!" the manager shouted, his face twisted with disgust and authority, his foot already pulling back as if daring the world to challenge him. The woman's eyes widened, not with fear alone but with something deeper, heavier, an emotion that didn't belong to someone powerless. Around them, phones rose, whispers erupted, and a tall man in an expensive suit near the elevator clutched his head in disbelief, his mouth falling open as if he'd just witnessed the collapse of something sacred. The lobby of Argon Dynamics was not a place where mistakes were made publicly. Glass walls, steel beams, and the quiet arrogance of wealth defined it. This was where billion-dollar deals were signed, where reputations were forged and destroyed with a handshake. And now, right in the center of it all, a woman dressed in torn layers, her gray hair matted with grime, was struggling to stand as the manager loomed over her, chest heaving. Convinced he had just enforced order. The manager's name was Victor Hawley, and power had followed him like a shadow for years. He was known for efficiency, for keeping the building pristine, for never letting problems linger. To him, the woman wasn't a person. She was an inconvenience, a stain on marble floors meant to reflect success. He didn't see the way she steadied herself without help, or how she calmly picked up her fallen bag, brushing dust from it with deliberate care. Security hesitated. That alone was unusual. Victor noticed it and sneered. "What are you waiting for?" he snapped. "Remove her, now." The woman finally spoke, her voice hoarse but controlled. "You didn't have to do that." Something in her tone unsettled him. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't angry. It was measured. Like someone used to being listened to. Victor laughed sharply. "You don't get to tell me what I have to do. This building isn't a shelter." Behind him, the man near the elevator took a step forward, then stopped himself. His hands were trembling. A few employees recognized him instantly: Daniel Cross, the elusive CEO of Argon Dynamics. The man whose name was synonymous with the company's meteoric rise. The man who rarely appeared in public, who trusted systems and people to work without his interference. And yet, here he was, watching his world tilt on its axis. The woman turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting Daniel's across the lobby. There was no signal, no dramatic reveal. Just a look that carried years of shared silence, shared strategy, shared understanding. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Victor followed her gaze and scoffed. "Don't bother looking for sympathy. No one here is going to save you." The woman straightened fully now, despite the pain etched across her face. "I'm not here to be saved," she said softly. The tension in the room thickened, pressing against everyone's chest. Cameras kept recording. Phones kept filming. Somewhere, a deal upstairs continued as if nothing extraordinary was happening. But down here, something irreversible had begun. Victor waved his hand dismissively and turned to walk away, convinced the moment was over, that his authority had once again gone unquestioned. He didn't notice Daniel stepping forward until a voice, quiet, cold, and unmistakably controlled, cut through the air. "Victor," Daniel said. The manager froze. No one called him by his first name like that. "Not here." Victor turned slowly, irritation already forming on his lips. "Sir," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was just handling a situation." Daniel looked past him, straight at the woman. His jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, the billionaire CEO said nothing. And in that silence, the crowd sensed it. The shift of power, the moment when a man used to command realized he might have crossed a line he couldn't step back from. You handled it, Daniel repeated calmly. By kicking her. Victor shrugged. We have standards. If we let people like her. Daniel interrupted, his voice still even, but now edged with something dangerous. Victor gestured vaguely. You know, vagrants, they disrupt business. The woman winced slightly as she adjusted her stance, but she didn't look away. She didn't look at Victor. Her gaze stayed on Daniel, steady, expectant, almost challenging. Daniel took another step forward. The room felt smaller with each movement he made. Do you know who she is? He asked. Victor chuckled, confidence returning. With all due respect, sir, she's nobody. A murmur swept through the crowd. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Daniel exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself. That nobody, he said, every word landing like a measured blow, is the reason this company exists. Victor's smile faltered. The woman finally spoke again, her voice carrying through the stunned lobby. Daniel. He turned to her instantly, all the steel in his posture softening. Are you hurt? Victor's blood ran cold. Employees stared, minds racing to connect dots they hadn't known existed. The homeless woman. The CEO. The way he looked at her, not with pity, not with surprise, but with something dangerously close to reverence. I'll be fine, she said quietly. But you should see this. She gestured around them to the cameras, the guards, the people who had watched and done nothing. Daniel nodded once. I already do? Victor opened his mouth, panic creeping into his voice. Sir, I didn't realize. Daniel raised a hand, silencing him. You didn't realize because you didn't care to. The weight of those words settled heavily over the lobby. This was no longer about a single kick or a single woman. It was about what had been allowed to happen under the illusion of efficiency and order. Daniel turned back to the crowd. Everyone here just witnessed something, he said. And what happens next will tell me exactly what kind of company we are. The woman stood beside him now, no longer invisible, no longer ignored. Her disguise had done its job. The truth had been revealed, not by announcement, but by action. And Victor Hawley, once untouchable within these walls, felt the first crack form beneath his feet, unaware that this was only the beginning of his fall. The silence that followed Daniel's words felt heavier than the marble beneath their feet. Victor's confidence didn't collapse all at once. It fractured. First in his eyes, then in the tightness of his jaw, then in the way his shoulders stiffened as if bracing for impact. He laughed weakly, a reflex more than a decision. Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding, he said quickly. If this woman claims, she doesn't need to claim anything, Daniel cut in, his voice low but unyielding. You've already shown us who you are. Security finally moved, but not toward the woman. They positioned themselves between Victor and the growing crowd, unsure who they were protecting anymore. Phones were still raised. Faces were pale. The lobby, once a cathedral of control, had turned into a courtroom without walls. The woman Margaret Cross bent slowly to pick up her fallen bag. The movement revealed a bruise blooming along her forearm, dark against her skin. A collective inhale rippled through the onlookers. Daniel noticed it instantly. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Did he touch you anywhere else? Daniel asked quietly. Margaret met his eyes. You told me to observe, not intervene, she said. This is what observation looks like. Victor swallowed hard. Undercover? He repeated, as if clinging to the word might pull him back from the edge. This was some kind of test? Margaret straightened, her posture changing in a way that made several people gasp. The fragility fell away. What remained was composure sharpened by years of boardrooms and negotiations. "No," she said. "This was reality. And you failed it without realizing anyone was watching." Victor shook his head, backing away half a step. "This isn't fair. I was enforcing policy." Daniel finally turned his full attention on him. "Show me the policy that authorizes assault." Victor opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. "We have a zero-tolerance approach to disruptions." "And yet," Daniel replied, "you tolerated violence." The crowd shifted uneasily. Employees exchanged glances, recognizing patterns they had endured quietly for years. Victor's reputation suddenly rearranged itself in their minds, not as strength, but as fear dressed up as leadership. Daniel gestured toward the security cameras. "Pull the footage," he said calmly. "All angles. Archive it. No edits." Victor's face drained of color. "Sir, with respect, that could expose the company." Daniel's expression hardened. "Good." Margaret stepped forward, her voice steady. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said. "I came because Daniel believed the culture had outgrown him. I wanted to see if that was true." Her eyes swept across the lobby. "So far, I've learned how easy it is to confuse cleanliness with cruelty." No one spoke. From the back, a young receptionist finally broke the silence. "He does this," she said, barely above a whisper. "Not kicking, but humiliating. He makes people feel small." Victor spun around. "That's a lie." Another voice joined in. "I saw him shove a delivery guy once," someone said. "Told him he didn't belong here." A third, "He fired my supervisor for questioning him." Each sentence landed harder than the last. The lobby transformed into something Victor had never feared before: collective memory. Daniel listened without interruption. When the voices faded, he spoke again. "Victor Halle, effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation." Suspended. Not fired. Yet Victor latched onto the word like a lifeline. "Suspended?" He echoed. "Sir, thank you." "I assure you," Daniel raised a hand. "You misunderstand. This isn't mercy. It's due process. Something you denied others." Victor's knees weakened. He looked around desperately, searching for all eyes, for faces that once nodded in agreement. He found none. Margaret turned toward the exit. "I'm leaving," she said to Daniel. "The rest is up to you." He nodded. "I'll walk you out." As they moved together through the parted crowd, whispers followed them like static. Outside, the city noise rushed back in sirens, traffic, the indifference of a world that hadn't yet caught up. Daniel stopped beside her. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought systems were enough." Margaret looked at him gently. "They are," she replied, "when the people inside them remember they're human." Behind them, Victor was escorted to a private office. The door closed softly, but the damage was already loud. HR flooded his inbox. Legal requests stacked up. A board member called, then another. The footage was already circulating internally, and outside the building, someone uploaded a clip. It went viral within an hour. The headline didn't mention policy or procedure. It mentioned a kick. A disguise. A truth uncovered the hard way. By nightfall, sponsors were calling. Advocacy groups demanded answers. Employees drafted open letters. The board scheduled an emergency meeting. Victor sat alone, staring at his reflection in the darkened glass, finally understanding the cruelty of being powerless. And Margaret, now clean and warm in a quiet car, closed her eyes, not in triumph, but in resolve. Because exposing one man was easy, what came next would test everyone. Asterisk, By the time the sun rose, Argon Dynamics was no longer reacting to a scandal. It was standing inside one. The boardroom lights burned through the night, casting long shadows across faces that had once been untouchable. No one checked their phones anymore for stock updates. They checked them for names. Every vibration meant another executive exposed. Another internal message leaked. Another former employee finding the courage to speak. The viral clip had stopped being replayed for shock value. Now it was evidence. Analysts slowed it frame by frame. Legal experts pointed out the hesitation of security. Behavioral specialists dissected Victor's posture, his sense of entitlement, his comfort with violence. Commentators stopped asking, "How could this happen?" and started asking, "How long has this been happening?" Daniel listened to it all without interrupting. The emergency board session reconvened at dawn. Coffee cups littered the table. Jackets were loosened. Voices were hoarse. "This is metastasizing," one director said bluntly. "It's not just Victor." "Never was," Daniel replied. HR projected new data onto the screen: exit interviews, internal surveys buried years ago, complaint logs that had been closed without resolution. Patterns emerged that no one could unsee. The same phrases repeated across departments: intimidation, public humiliation, retaliation masked as performance management. These people were promoted, the HR head said quietly. They were rewarded. Silence followed. Daniel finally spoke. Then the system worked exactly as designed. That sentence landed harder than any accusation. The board voted unanimously to expand the investigation beyond Victor. Independent oversight was authorized. External auditors were given unrestricted access. Non-disclosure agreements related to workplace conduct were temporarily voided. It was a corporate earthquake. Within hours, inboxes across the company flooded with messages, some cautious, some desperate, some raw with years of suppressed anger. Employees who had learned to survive by staying invisible were suddenly being asked to be seen. Speak freely. You are protected. For the first time, many believed it. Margaret spent the day in a quiet office away from headquarters, her disguise gone but her purpose sharpened. She read testimony after testimony, each story tightening something in her chest. People she had never met described fear she recognized instantly. She had felt it yesterday, wearing borrowed clothes in silence. "This isn't about one kick," she said to Daniel over the phone. "It's about permission." Victor, meanwhile, was learning what happens when authority evaporates. Placed on administrative leave, he was escorted out through a side entrance meant for discretion. Cameras still found him. They always did. His badge deactivated with a dull beep that echoed louder in his mind than the kick ever had. At home, he paced. Called his lawyer. Called an executive who didn't answer. Then another. Then another. The network he thought unbreakable dissolved into voicemail. He replayed the moment in his head, not with regret, but confusion. This wasn't how power was supposed to work. The investigation accelerated. Archived footage revealed Victor's pattern, leaning too close, invading space, cutting people down with smiles sharp enough to draw blood. In one clip, he mocked a janitor's accent. In another, he shoved a courier aside while laughing. No one had stopped him. Depositions began that afternoon. Daniel testified first, voluntarily. "I trusted metrics over people," he said under oath. "I built a company that prized efficiency so highly that it forgot dignity is not inefficient, it's foundational." The admission rippled outward. Business channels paused mid-analysis. Social media split not in outrage, but in something stranger, respect. Margaret's deposition followed. She described entering the building unnoticed, being ignored, being treated like debris. When she recounted the kick, her voice did not shake. What shook the room was what came next. "I wasn't shocked that he kicked me," she said. "I was shocked that no one stopped him." Security lowered their eyes. Victor's deposition was last. He arrived defensive, his posture stiff, his answers rehearsed. He spoke of pressure, of threats to safety, of policies interpreted too aggressively. When shown the footage, he looked away. "Do you regret it?" the investigator asked. "I regret how it looks," Victor replied. That answer sealed him. By evening, 3 senior managers resigned preemptively. Another was placed on leave. Departments froze operations. Training was suspended. Every leader suddenly aware that their past was no longer private. The board released interim findings before markets closed. Systemic failure. Cultural negligence. Leadership accountability. Stock dropped sharply, then stabilized. Investors stayed. Employees noticed. Inside the company, meetings changed tone. People spoke without permission. Managers listened because they had to. Authority began shifting not upward, but outward. Victor watched the news alone, scrolling endlessly, seeing his name transformed from enforcer to example. Rage gave way to dread. He wasn't being sacrificed. He was being studied. The final report was scheduled for release the following morning. Margaret and Daniel stood together that night, overlooking the skyline that once symbolized success without scrutiny. "I never wanted to burn it down," Daniel said quietly. Margaret nodded. "You didn't," she replied. "You finally let it feel the fire." Somewhere across the city, Victor sat in the dark, understanding too late that the kick had not been the crime. It had been the confession. And when the truth surfaced fully, nothing, not his title, not his past loyalty, not his belief in power would be enough to save him. The final report was released at exactly 8 o'clock a.m. No press conference. No dramatic music. Just a document 200 pages long uploaded to the company's website and sent directly to regulators, partners, and every employee on the payroll. Within minutes, the world stopped arguing and started reading. The findings were devastating, not just for Victor Hawley, but for the mythology Argon Dynamics had wrapped itself in for years. The report laid everything bare: how aggression had been rebranded as decisiveness, how fear had been mislabeled as discipline, how silence had been incentivized until it became culture. Names were named. Timelines were precise. Video stills were embedded, impossible to deny. Victor's actions were no longer isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a system that had rewarded him until the moment it could no longer pretend not to see him. By noon, the authorities announced formal charges for assault. Victor was taken into custody quietly, without cameras, without speeches. No grand humiliation. No public spectacle. Just consequences arriving exactly when power could no longer delay them. Inside the company, the response was immediate and irreversible. The board dissolved 3 executive committees outright. Senior leadership was restructured in a single vote. Performance incentives tied solely to output were eliminated. New leadership standards were adopted, not slogans, but enforceable conditions with independent oversight. For the first time in Argon's history, employees voted not on branding, not on charity initiatives, on leadership. Representatives were elected across departments. Anonymous reporting was replaced with transparent review boards. Training was rewritten from the ground up, not to teach compliance, but to teach restraint. And standing quietly behind all of it was Margaret Cross. She refused interviews, declined features, turned down every request to tell her story for inspiration campaigns. When asked why, she answered plainly, "This isn't my story. It's theirs." She spent her days meeting with employees not as the CEO's wife, not as an undercover figure, but as a listener. She took notes by hand. She asked uncomfortable questions. She never defended the company. Not once. Daniel watched her work with a mixture of pride and humility. "You changed everything," he told her one evening as they walked through the lobby where it had all begun. She shook her head. "No, I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." The marble floor had been repaired, the column polished, but nothing felt the same. And that was the point. Months passed. Argon Dynamics didn't rebound with flashy numbers or triumphant headlines. It rebuilt slowly, visibly, under scrutiny. Some investors left. Others stayed, drawn not by certainty, but by credibility. The company's valuation stabilized, not inflated, but real. And inside, something rare took hold. Trust. Employees began staying, not because they were afraid to leave, but because they wanted to see what the company could become. Managers learned to pause before acting. Security learned to intervene instead of obey. Power learned that it was being watched not from above, but from within. Victor was sentenced quietly. No one from the company attended the hearing. He served time not as a martyr, not as a scapegoat, but as a cautionary truth. His name faded from headlines, then from memory, preserved only in training materials and case studies, not to shame, but to warn. Years later, business schools would analyze the incident, not as a PR disaster, but as a moral rupture. The day authority mistook cruelty for control and was finally corrected by exposure. On the anniversary of the report's release, Argon held no celebration. Instead, they opened a community center across the street from headquarters, staffed by employees, funded transparently, governed independently. Margaret attended the opening without announcement. No cameras followed her inside. A young woman at the desk recognized her anyway. "Thank you," the woman said quietly. Margaret smiled. "For what?" "For making it safe to speak." Margaret's smile faded into something deeper. "You made it safe," she replied. "I just listened when you did." That night, Daniel and Margaret stood on their balcony, the city glowing below them. "I used to think leadership meant building something that couldn't be challenged," Daniel said. Margaret leaned against the railing. "It means building something that survives being challenged." Below them, people moved through the lobby freely. Employees, visitors, janitors, messengers, no one invisible, no one above consequence. Kick that had once echoed through marble halls was now just a footnote, but the moment it exposed the truth it forced into the light had changed everything. Not because a CEO demanded justice, but because a woman, treated as disposable, refused to disappear. And when power finally met accountability, it didn't collapse. It transformed.